Hi, and welcome to the podcast. My name is Father Bill W. I'm an Episcopal priest in long-term recovery, living here in Austin, Texas, and glad you're with us. If you've been staying with us in this series, I know it's been difficult, and I really appreciate you if you have made this journey with me. But I think it's really important. We're going through Edward Edinger's book. It is called Ego and Archetype. And probably I've gone through it about 5 or 6 times, and each time I get something new. I get to understand it a little bit more deeply. And so I hope this has served as a good introduction to you to kind of the inner journey, the deeper depth psychology that Jung pioneered. And I think it's becoming more and more popular, and a lot of people in 12-step recovery are turning to it. Richard Rohr makes reference to it many, many times in some of his talks. By way of business, just before we jump in, got some. This is April when we're recording this, and 2 workshops coming up. One on the second Saturday, and I think one towards the end of the month in April. If you need a reference to those, please write me. You can reach me at twowayprayer@gmail.com, and I'll be happy to send you the links and the handouts for those. So, got a lot to cover here. So let's just jump right in. There was a guy by the name of Viktor Frankl. I've mentioned him a few times in some of these podcasts. His work was tremendously helpful to me in early recovery. He wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. And, many of us just coming into the program, we have lost contact with the meaning of our lives. And I knew I needed to stop drinking, but my deeper question, I was kind of afraid to ask it, but what's next? What comes after this? If I really got alcohol out of my life, was there anything big enough to take its place? And where was I going to find the meaning, the purpose for my life? Because at that point, it felt like it was over, and I'd built my life around my addiction. And Frankel's book really helped me. It helped me to get some hope, to find meaning and purpose, as he did in a concentration camp. I mean, he was a Jewish psychiatrist in a concentration camp, and within that context, he saw how vital it was for him and for those people around him to have meaning and purpose in their lives, that they could go without water, could go without food, but could not last a day without meaning and purpose. And there I was at the Salvation Army in downtown Detroit, and I figured, well, this is bad, but Frankl had it a hell of a lot worse than I did, and if he can make it, maybe there's hope for me. So we're going through Edinger's book. We're up to chapter 4, and this chapter is entitled The Search for Meaning. And let me start off with a quote from Edinger. He says this: "One of the symptoms of alienation in the modern age is the widespread sense of meaninglessness. Many patients seek psychotherapy not for any clearly defined disorder, but because they feel that life has no meaning. The thoughtful psychotherapist can scarcely avoid the impression that these people are experiencing the disrupting effect not only of an unsatisfactory childhood experience, but also an upheaval occasioned by a major cultural transition. We seem to be passing through," he says, "a collective psychological reorientation equivalent in magnitude to the emergence of Christianity from the ruins of the Roman Empire." Just think about that. Kind of interrupting here, but think about that. I mean, what a shift that was, to go from a belief in many gods to a belief in one God, to have your whole society turned upside down. And he's saying that's really where we are today. Continue. Accompanying the decline of traditional religion, there is increasing evidence of a general psychic disorientation. We have lost our bearings. Our relation to life has become ambiguous. The great symbol system, which has organized Christianity, seems no longer able to command the full commitment of men or to fulfill their ultimate needs. The result is a pervasive feeling of meaninglessness and alienation from life. Whether or not a new collective religious symbol will emerge remains to be seen. For the present, those aware of the problem are obliged to make their own individual search for a meaningful life. Individuation becomes their way of life. So religion is in decline. The beliefs that were just taken for granted are no longer hold. And so what do you find? So many people coming into the big book, coming into the program, see in the big book, well, this is so kind of God, there's so much God here, and in the culture, there's so much less of God. Well, we've continued to deteriorate, and we're searching for new ways to find that meaningful connection to the divine. I see so many young people coming in. They're lost. They're adrift. They come into AA, and what I hear from them is this it? Drink coffee, smoke cigarettes. Is this all there really is to offer? And thank God, there's always been some people living on the spiritual frontiers of the program, and I was blessed to meet some of those men and women in my early recovery. And I knew that they had found something inside themselves, something deep that answered their need. They'd found meaning, they'd found purpose for their lives. It came from the inside, not just from the outside. They were members of AA, but they had grabbed hold of something deeper than AA. AA points us to something. It points us to the spiritual life. And they had taken that journey, remained within the program, but as what my first sponsor said, if AA were to disappear tomorrow, I would still stay sober. He had connected with something beyond just the organizational elements of AA. Not to say those are not important, but they shouldn't be everything. Big Book says the great reality is found within, that the meaning of life can't be found, these people told me. You'll never figure out the meaning of life. But what they said was, you can discover the meaning of your life, just like we have discovered the meaning of our lives. And that is subjective. Subjective meaning it's the individual. It's an individual journey. It's a group journey. Yes, that's true. But at the same time, it's an individual journey as well. And this means that only I can find it for me, and only you can find it for yourself. Quote Edinger again. Meaning is found in subjectivity, but who values subjectivity? When we use the word subjective, we usually say or imply only subjective, as though the subjective element were of no consequence. Since the decline of religion, we have had no adequate collective container for the introverted subjective life. All trends are in the opposite direction. The various pressures of Western society all subtly urged the individual to seek life meaning in externals and in objectivity, whether the goal be the state, the corporate organization, the good material life, or the acquisition of objective scientific knowledge. In each case, human meaning is being sought where it does not exist, in externals, in objectivity. the unique, particular, not to be duplicated subjectivity of the individual, which is the real source of human meanings, and which is not susceptible to an objective statistical approach, is the despised stone rejected by the builders of our contemporary world view. I think you can sum that up by saying modern society really doesn't believe in the soul. But psychology, it gets its name. Its very name comes from psyche, and that means soul. But most psychologists offer very little to address the needs of the soul. They've abandoned the soul. Why? Because it's subjective. It's individual, and they're looking for mass meaning. Well, I don't know that you can find mass meaning. I think it has to be found individually. And this is where Jung comes into the picture. Jung is a scientist, but he's a scientist who takes the role of the soul in human life seriously. And the soul, Jung says, speaks to us through symbols. Through symbols. It communicates by sending messages from the unconscious to the conscious mind. How does it do it? In sleep, it does it through dreams. It does it through the power of music, the power of art, the power of poetry. It's the difference between the left brain and the right brain. The right brain is the spiritual part of man. It's the part that comes alive, but can't be studied nearly as much as the left brain can, the cognitive part. So the right brain, this part of us connects us to that something beyond the ego. Big Book says, our thinking will, as time passes, be more on the plane of inspiration. Well, what does that mean? It means that my mind is connecting with something beyond the usual ego thoughts, that it has opened a channel within whereby God, Spirit, can speak to us, can engage with us. All right? We ask God to direct our thinking, open the channel between me and the mysterious other, the beyond that is within. It's a quote from a Jungian psychologist that really just grabbed me. The beyond that is within. That's what we're getting in touch with. And that's what we're meant to be in touch with. And if we're not in touch with that, and if we don't have a living connection to that, we're gonna feel it. We are gonna feel like we're missing out on the meaning and the purpose of our own very lives. So Edinger says this. He says, modern man's most urgent need is to discover the reality and value of the inner subjective world of the psyche, to discover the symbolic life. He gives another quote from Jung. Jung says this, man is in need of a symbolic life, but we have no symbolic life. Have you got a corner somewhere in your houses where you performed the rites as you can see in India? Even the very simple houses there have at least a curtained corner where the members of the household can lead the symbolic life, where they can make their new vows or meditation. We don't have it. We have no time, no place, only the symbolic life, and it can express the need of the soul, the daily need of the soul, mind you. And because people have no such thing, they can never step out of this mill, this awful, grinding, banal life in which they are nothing but. Nothing but. Have you ever felt that way? I am nothing but. All right? Restless, irritable, discontent. Why? Because I'm not connected to the beyond that is within. And this is the vital link that simply has to be there. And so, how many of us have watched people go and relapse? Why? Because inside they felt their life was nothing but. How many of us have seen others not come into the program or not stay in the program? Why? Because they felt that their really deepest needs weren't being addressed. Now, they've got responsibility for that, I know. But we also have a responsibility to show them that path to a living reality, to an experience of the divine within that lights them up, that excites them. I did a therapy session once with a group of addicts, and kind of boring. Was sitting in treatment, and but my subject was, hey, what did alcohol and drugs do for you? And damn if they didn't come alive as they started sharing the depth of what that connection was like for them. It was false, but it was also real. It did something. Well, how are you going to find that? How are you going to find that in recovery? All right, that's really the question, and that's what the symbolic life is all about. So Edinger asks, what is this symbolic life? And he starts by saying there's a huge difference between a sign and a symbol. A sign is a token of meaning, he says, that stands for a known entity. A stop sign is the classic example. What does it mean? It means stop, and that's all it means. And in a sense, then, you could say a sign is dead, that's the end of its meaning. It's communicated what it had to give. But a symbol is different. A symbol is somehow alive. Edinger, a sign communicates abstract, objective meaning, whereas a symbol conveys living, subjective meaning. It is a living, organic entity which acts as a releaser and transformer of psychic energy, soul energy. We can thus say a sign is dead, but a symbol is alive. Symbols are spontaneous products of the soul. One cannot manufacture a symbol. One can only discover it. Symbols are carriers of psychic energy. That is why it's proper to consider them as something alive. They transmit to the ego, either consciously or unconsciously, life energy, which supports, guides, and motivates the individual. And I think that's a kind of a beautiful description of what it is many of us have found within two-way prayer. It's the linkage to the beyond within, which speaks to us in a voice and guides us and leads us and supports us in ways far, far deeper than we had experienced prior to that practice. Edinger's talking here about the relationship between the ego and the symbol. And he says there are three ways to describe it. The first, two of them, he says, are dead ends, and one of them is alive. So we'll look at the dead ends first. The first one he calls the concrete fallacy, being literal minded. He says this, in the concrete fallacy, the individual is unable to distinguish symbols from concrete external reality. Inner images are experienced as being real external facts. Examples are the belief of primitives, hallucinations and delusions of psychotics, and superstitions of all kinds. Confused mixtures of psychic and physical reality, such as the practice of alchemy, astrology, and the numerous present-day cults of healing fall into this category. The same fallacy is at work, he says, in those religious believers who misunderstand symbolic religious images. to refer to literal concrete facts and make their own personal religious convictions. We shouldn't mistake their own personal religious convictions for universal and absolute truth. I think he's saying these are the religious fundamentalists. It can also be the political fundamentalists too. I mean, but it's that fundamentalist mentality that is so destructive. People read the Bible literally, and in doing so, they miss the spirit, and so they feel like it's a dead end. I mean, those of us who watch it. I mean, I looked at religious people. Do you want what they have? No, I didn't. I really didn't, because it looked so dead. Can you introduce me to something that's alive, that's living? That's going to connect me to the deepest parts of me. And we have this in the program too. We have the big book thumpers and some lovingly refer to some as 12-step Nazis. That they beat people over the head with the book. They say that every word of the big book is divinely inspired. Be careful. I don't think the spiritual journey is to memorize the book. I think the purpose of the spiritual journey is to be guided by the book, to take that journey ourselves, to bring it to life. And that is a different journey than becoming kind of stuck in the machine. And that's where I was at 20 years sober. I said, is this all there is? Got to be more to it. And that's when I went on and discovered some of the early history, and particularly the two-way prayer business. Hey, the other danger is to reduce everything down to nothing. And these are the people that Edinger calls the reductionists. And they take the mystery out of things. If it can't be proved in the laboratory, it cannot be true. And God, this is science at its worst. I mean, science has a place, but science is not the answer to everything. Science is not the sole determiner of what reality is. And if we let it become so, we're going to miss the deeper reality with a capital R, eh? And most psychology has really gone this route. It seeks objective truth, test it. Can the experiment be repeated? If it can, okay, maybe it's valid. But if it can't, but see, it's that objective rather than the subjective route. It's good science, but the soul has a way of hiding itself from scientists. See, and it's in this view there can be no true symbols. Everything is really a sign. Religious symbolism, they say, is no more than evidence of ignorance and primitive superstition. And this attitude, Edinger says, does real violence to the reality of the soul. So, what is option number 3? What's behind that door? And option 3, he says, is to learn how to live the symbolic life. Quote, in this instance, the ego, while clearly separated from the archetypal psyche, from the greater self, let's call it, is open and receptive to the effects of symbolic imagery, a kind of conscious dialogue between the ego and emerging symbols become possible. The symbol is then able to perform its proper function as releaser and transformer of psychic energy with full participation of conscious understanding. You see, the ego has a role in this. If we do not have an ego, then the messages, the stuff that's going to come up from the unconscious will determine it as literally real. And then we can't determine what is real and what is beyond real, and it becomes really dangerous. You go to the back wards of the state hospital, you're going to see oftentimes inflated individuals. I am Jesus. I am Napoleon. I am some huge character. And we always identify with some huge character. And we can't see where they leave off and we begin. Have to have an ego, but it has to be a healthy one, a right-sized one. Edinger goes on to say that the ultimate goal of Jungian psychotherapy is to make the symbolic process conscious, to create a channel, a connection, a link between the unconscious symbols of the soul and the conscious mind. How? Through dreams, through entering myths and legends, through telling sacred stories and allowing them to have an effect upon us, you see, through active imagination, through two-way prayer. It's using the imagination rightly, properly. Gives a couple of examples. And the first is an old Jewish legend. And in listening to this, you know it's telling a truth. You know it's saying something that is true, even though you know it is a fable, it's a tale, all right? You know it's not literally true, and yet it awakens something inside of us that we relate to. Listen to it. Here it is. Prior to the birth of a child, God calls the seed of the future human being before him and decides what its soul shall become, man or woman, sage or simpleton, rich or poor. Only one thing he leaves undecided, namely, whether he shall be righteous or unrighteous. For as it is written, quote, all things are in the hand of the Lord, except the fear of the Lord, unquote. The soul, however, pleads with God not to be sent from the life beyond, but God makes answer, quote, the world to which I send thee is better than the world in which you were. And when I formed you for this earthly fate, unquote. Thereupon God orders the angels in charge of the souls living in the beyond to initiate this soul into all the mysteries that the other world holds through paradise and hell. In such manner, the soul experiences all the secrets of the beyond at the moment of birth. However, when the soul comes to earth, the angel extinguishes the light of knowledge burning above it, and the soul, enclosed in its earthly envelope, enters this world having forgotten its lofty wisdom, but always seeking to regain it. To regain what? To regain who we are. And at some deep level, we know we're tremendously valuable. And we can get caught up in that too much. And that can become egotism. Or we can be caught up in it too little. And then it loses all of its meaning and purpose. And we get ourselves so lost. Remembering who we are. That's what the story tells. Remember who you are. That at some deep level, you're a child of God. Can you feel that? Can we experience that? And that's the connecting energy that we have to have. And it's absolutely vital. And if we miss finding that, I think we've missed it all. All right. This is what Jung calls individuation. That we listen to what is calling to us, pushing us to remember, to become all that we are meant to be. See, we're not just alcoholics, we are children of God, and we have to hang on to that and remember that. Now, Edinger quotes a second story. And this one is a Christian story. But it's a Gnostic tale, and it's called "The Hymn of the Pearl." And I put it in the notes. You can read it there. But right now, I just want you to listen to it. And it's found in one of the scriptures that never made it into the church canon. It was never fully recognized. But I tell you this, when I first read it, something really just came alive in me, and it spoke to me. And I hope it may do that for you as well. I'd like you to listen to it, but listen with your imagination and not your critical left brain at work, pulling it apart. So the Hymn of the Pearl says this: When I was a child and dwelt in the kingdom of my father's house, and delighted in the wealth and splendor of those who raised me, my parents sent me forth from the east, our homeland, with provisions for the journey. They took off from me the robe of glory, which in their love they had made for me, and my purple mantle that was woven to conform exactly to my figure, and made a covenant with me and wrote it in my heart that I might not forget it. And they said to me, when you go down into Egypt and bring up the one pearl which lies in the middle of the sea and which is encircled by the fiery dragon, you will again put on your robe of glory and will be next in rank to your brother in our kingdom. So I left the east and took my way downward, accompanied by 2 royal envoys, since the way down was dangerous and hard, and I was young for such a journey. And I came into the land of Egypt, and my companions parted from me. I went straight to the dragon and settled down close by his inn until he should sleep, so that I might take the pearl from him. I was a stranger to my fellow dwellers in the inn. I clothed myself in their garments, lest they suspect me of coming to steal the pearl and arouse the dragon against me. But they ingratiated themselves with me and mixed me a drink with their cunning, so that I forgot that I was a king's son, and I served their king. And I forgot the pearl for which my parents had sent me, and I sank into deep slumber. My parents beheld what had happened to me, and they grieved for my sake. And they wrote me a letter saying, from the Father, the King of Kings, greetings. Awake and arise out of your sleep, and perceive the words of our letter. Remember that you are a king's son, and behold, you are living in bondage. Be mindful of the pearl, for whose sake you did depart into Egypt. Remember your robe of glory, that you might put it on again. Like a messenger was the letter. It rose up in the form of an eagle, the king of all winged fowl, and flew until it alighted beside me and became holy speech. At its voice and sound I awoke and arose from my sleep, took it up, kissed it, broke its seal, and read. Just as was written on my heart were the words of my letter to read. I remembered that I was a king's son, and that my freeborn soul desired its own kind. And I remembered the pearl for which I was sent into Egypt, and I began to enchant the terrible and snorting dragon. I charmed it to sleep by naming over it my father's name, the name of our next in rank, and that of my mother, the Queen of the East. I seized the pearl and turned to go to the house of my father. Their filthy and impure garments I put off and left them behind in their land, and directed my way that I might come to the light of our homeland, the East. My letter, which had awakened me, I found before me on my way. And as it had awakened me with its voice, so it guided me with its light that shone before me, and with its voice it encouraged my fear, and with its love it drew me on. Then, as he approaches the homeland, his parents send out to him his robe of glory and his mantle. The story continues, and I stretched toward it, and I took it, and I decked myself with the beauty of its colors, and I cast the royal mantle about my entire self. Clothed therein, I ascended to the gate of salutation and adoration. I bowed my head and adored the splendor of my Father, who had sent it to me, whose commands I had fulfilled, as he too had done what he promised. He then received me joyfully, and I was with him in his kingdom forevermore. Isn't that a beautiful story? And what Edinger talks about, he says, this is the story of our conscious ego. It's the story of depth psychology and what happens, I think, in really, really profound and good recovery. That the ego begins as a child. It's part of a royal family. And if you remember, this is the inflation we talked about in earlier episodes. So it has to separate from the parents, just like a child has to separate from its parents. And it has to go through pain, has to go through maturation. And this is the hero's journey on which it is sent and you and I are sent. But when it gets to the foreign country, what does it do? It falls asleep. It forgets who it is. It forgets why he came. It drinks at the inn. Love that expression, huh? And it becomes like the others, sitting at the bar. But then the awakening comes. It comes through a letter, and the letter is alive. It's a symbol, you see. It's a voice. It's an eagle. It's a guiding light, you know. But it's a power that really is within, and this is the symbolic life. And the symbolic life does what? It leads us back to our father, mother, our home, and they welcome us with the next in line. And that's a reference to Brother Jesus, and that might be why they kind of took it out. Didn't fit the story. Hey, anyway, several years ago, I did a weekend retreat with about 40 young addicts, and we used this story to build the whole weekend around. And we identified and group, how we had gotten lost. We identified what our ends looked like, how bad things got, in the drinking and the drugging. And then how something called us either from within or without. And we knew it. We knew the moment when we couldn't stay there any longer, when we had to go and change. We remembered that we were each and every one of us one of God's kids. And at the final session of the retreat, I took a golden robe, and each of us placed it around our shoulders. Somebody placed it on us. And then we were to speak from that place. And what it meant to be the son of the living God, oh my God, there was not a dry eye in the house as people connected with that internal energy, and the symbolism could speak to them. This to me is what recovery is about. This is what prayer is about. This is what finding the voice inside is about. So it's not just memorizing the book. It is letting the book speak to us and lead us to become the children of God that each and every one of us is. So once again, heavy stuff. Hope you were able to find something meaningful in this and take it to heart. All right. Well, thank you for listening. God bless. Do keep coming back.